All right, thank you very much. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Right, so I was speaking about some of the concerns of the heads of government to embrace and encourage a range of services that draw on the region's indigenous talents, its artistic and cultural traditions, as well as its intellectual and sporting history of achievements. And again, how are we going to help to promote these ideas and, importantly, monetize them? In fact, Ms. Marcia Forbes, who is there listening to me, when I look at, it's not, apart from countries like, and I know Ghana, with its rising potential oil industry, might benefit from that shot in the arm. Trinidad has done very well with its oil and manufacturing. But in countries like Jamaica, where we have not built out our manufacturing capabilities, we still tend to rely a lot on primary production. And so when we look at the challenge for growth in GDP, you're not going to see high value added in primary production unless you're going to convert the production to secondary and tertiary activities. And that is part of the problem. So, yeah, it's wonderful to have agriculture, but if you're not doing agro processing and other related services, then you're not going to see a high level of GDP because we need to add the productivity. So I made the point that we have an array of indigenous talents, whether sports or otherwise. So these are new areas for us to expand and monetize, because they are going to contribute to overall GDP growth and our own sustainability and diversification of our economy. That's a part of the point I'm making. So you actually hold a key role in that regard. And it's quite interesting because, Gary, when I looked at some of the reports, for example, coming out of St. James, the fact is that even in terms of tourism is not only persons who are providing hospitality services in terms of waiters and cleaners, etc. But what about entertainers? What about the maintenance persons? But we also have a region where we have so few institutions that are dedicated to developing these talents. And I've never believed that we are necessarily to have all homogeneous schools and institutions. You need diversification. So, yes, we like the idea of having Edna Manley. The other challenge is that when you only have one institution that serves the entire region, it is also constraining the growth and development of these particular sectors. So if you want to promote arts and culture, you can have one tertiary institution dedicated to that, because you're not going to have, if the capacity might be just about 300 graduates per year, you might need more than that. So I'm leading by example because and it's already happening. Now Culver is being targeted to facilitate what I call a food court approach, where one institution will be able to provide a multiplicity of specialized services. So GC Foster for sports will be there. So I'm bringing these institutions to the West, not just in Kingston, bringing them to the West, because what we find is a lot of persons who now want to go into tertiary institution by either the fact you really don't have institutional capacity, based on the fact you will tend to have one institution, then geographically, persons who are far away, it's very expensive for them, as we have discovered with University of the West Indies, where the small islands find it very difficult to always travel to Barbados or Trinidad or to Jamaica. But if you bring the education and training right onto their doorsteps, they will access it. So I'm bringing Edna Manley, GC Foster, Case, and of course Caribbean Maritime University to Nakalva, so that sports, the creative arts, etc., and plus more engineering and technology can be made easily available because everybody can't come to Kingston. Um, and I'm looking forward to that interesting development. And the other interesting development, and what I'm saying here now, this is breaking news, clear, because the first time I'm actually saying this. Now, interestingly, because Montego Bay is considered to be the tourism capital of Jamaica, but equally, Montego Bay doesn't really have a public dedicated hospitality training institution either. I mean, apart from, again, I'm making the same complaint, Hard Runaway Bay Cardiff Hotel, which is in St. Anne, but it can't serve the entire country. So we are adding within our schools now a program tourism between grades 12 and 13. But I want to signal that I need 17 high schools to be built, based on still short of high schools. But I've said I don't believe in homogeneous. You need to have specialists and diversity. So we have STEM academies, we have technical schools. So I have 5 schools that I've announced that we're going to be building first from the list of 17. So one of those schools are to be built in St. James. So it is 2 in Manchester, 1 either in Clarendon or St. Catherine, 1 in St. Anne, 1 in St. James. And I'm saying, breaking news, the 1 in St. James will be a specialized school for performing arts. So that is breaking news. So you can make sure you run with that. I'm waiting for the applause. Thank you very much. Because part of the recommendation, coming out of the CARICOM recommendation, was the strengthening of educational programs in the arts and support services at all levels in member states, including vocational and short-term professional training programs. And it said the piloting of a performing arts high school in each country. So because that was a prescription, I want to lead by example, Marcia. So I'm ticking that off, that under my watch, I'll make sure that this happened, that one of our high schools will be dedicated to performing arts. And Cubans, many of these countries, many countries do have this. The creation of national and regional registries of artists and cultural workers, expanding the list of persons in culture eligible for free movement across the region. These decisions were ratified at the 36th meeting of the heads of government of CARICOM in Barbados from July to 4th, 2015, and have become the basis for regional development of a Caribbean creative economy. Right? So I'm saying that you're central to this. I don't think I've seen this sector growing as fast as it should. When I think of Hollywood, for example, and that America have been able to use, we know, in terms of their content. Their content is global, and Hollywood is billions and billions of dollars worth. I mean, these guys live as high rollers. And that's why I'm saying this is an arena that we can challenge and of course, create our own niche. That this is a very viable, lucrative area, the area of the creative economy. So I'm looking forward for us to work with Minister Grange and the rest of our colleagues to make this happen, even the Minister of Finance, that we will need his support. So let me now turn to the critical need for freedom of expression and information. In looking and moving forward, the Jamaican government wishes to affirm its unwavering commitment to freedom of the press, expression of free speech. This year, Jamaica, proudly, has been ranked by Reporters Without Borders as number 6. 6 out of 180 countries across the world in press freedom. It is worth underscoring that in Jamaica, although the bulk of local electronic media is in fact regulated, TV, cable, and radio, they operate in an environment which is governed by an independent regulator. Our content regulators, the Broadcasting Commission, are appointed by our Governor General after consultation with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. The commissioners are guaranteed security of tenure for their term akin to that of Supreme Court judges. The regulated media have therefore functioned with unfettered editorial freedom, subject only to oversight by a political independent regulator. In this environment, talk shows, news and current affairs flourish without fear of any impartial, biased, or political fetter. This demonstrates, ladies and gentlemen, that though we are young democracies, we can lead mightily from our small corners, and we must. It is when all ideas contend and are also exchanged that democracies are stronger. When the media is unfettered, governments and other institutions are held to account to the people that they serve. It is then that there is a platform for the otherwise voiceless. It is then that justice can prevail and truth, light shines for all to see. And it is then that information feeds knowledge, innovation, and development. It is, of course, important that these rights and freedoms are exercised responsibly and that attention is paid to maintaining high standards with respect to accuracy and fair play to preserve the credibility upon which the profession depends. I'd like now to close by talking about opportunities, challenges, and elicit your own perspectives for a response. I urge, therefore, our Caribbean societies to guard against insularity. We must take our place in the discourse of the global geopolitics. I encourage our governments to adapt to our new media environment, of which social media is now a critical part. Embrace social media as an additional means to engage with our citizenry. Encourage youth participation in our democracies and build trust in our systems. We can't have everybody running away from the political process. Where we find faults, we must mend them. But if we don't have people participating and people of quality and integrity, we must build more of these persons and support them, then our democracy is at risk. So you have an important role to play, not just to tear down, but to build up. We see the power of the media in the Me Too movement. And it is from advocacy against gender-based injustices in the West to campaigns, for example, for girls' access to education in the East that now cannot be muted given the coverage through multiple media platforms. In 2014, while there was the Ferguson riots in Missouri, which spoke out against the police shooting of an unarmed black teenager, Mike Brown, you recall, Jamaica was grappling with its own local issue with one Maria Dean tragedy. Maria Dean was unfortunately beaten while in police custody in the parish of St. James and later died. That matter is still before the courts. The ordinary citizens' perspectives were amplified alongside traditional broadcast journalists and media houses' coverage, ensuring appropriate focus on the issues attendant on both security and justice. Tools available to journalists, civil society, and the public at large, such as our own access to information legislation, must not be underused. Just recently, the use of our ATI Act exploded the widely held view that women in our country were not allowed to wear sleeveless shirts or dresses to conduct business in government establishment, effectively providing a barrier to access timely government services. Human rights activist and blogger Susan Goff utilized the Access to Information Act to request from a number of government ministries whether this enforced dress code was originated from any policy document. Following the request, it was revealed that no policy prohibited women's access to government buildings in sleeveless shirts or dresses. The national discourse again ignited. And this is where these discussions can influence policy. And so after cabinet deliberation on this matter, last Friday, Prime Minister, Most Honorable Andrew Holness, formally gave instructions for the suspension of the no sleeveless de facto policy and instructed a full review of government dress code practices. This is evident of Dr. Baris Bayran's of the Middle East Technical University in Ankara, Turkey's statement that as a tool, the right to freedom of expression and information is an integral mechanism of self-development, self-government, ethical governance, building a tolerant society, search for truth and autonomy, and consequently for social progress, human development, global development, and thus one's own real self-interest and hence ethical possibility enhancement. Let us now explore the challenges to the survival of indigenous Caribbean media. This section of my presentation deals with points we are discussing internally in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, following concern raised by our Broadcasting Commission. We recognize that the global media industry is in the middle of a profound transformation. We have left behind the era in which the media industry was organized and regulated by infrastructure. That's radio, television, telephone, print, etc. Today, content flows over many different networks and technologies. News, information, entertainment, education. Yes, Cordell. Directions, welcome. Home management and shopping. Translation, and because of the highway you got here so fast. I told you earlier, he just coming back from a month ago. It took less than 2 hours to get here, well, without police escort. I'm sure he drove within the speed limit outside of the highway. On the highway, he drove no higher than 110 kilometers. Many different services can now be handled on the same networks. And different services can be transmitted on a number of competing networks using different and combined technology platforms, wired or wireless. This means that the flow of content is no longer controlled by infrastructure. In addition, it is now possible to provide media services without the need to have any local presence at all, or ownership, or any infrastructure other than access to the internet, which makes it increasingly difficult to regulate effectively within a single jurisdiction, let alone by a given technology. These changes mean that the traditional divisions by region and infrastructure are becoming less and less relevant. In the new era, consolidated content is the heart of the media world, while infrastructure and devices are just but delivery channels. This has implication of how we will regulate, paying particular attention to what flows through an increasingly diverse array of pipes. The media and communication sector today is in the business of conveying both specialized and mass information across the rapidly eroding borders of broadcasting, television and radio, business and market information, education, entertainment, publishing, advertising, telecommunications, motion pictures, home videos, video games, computer databases, and other information products are all now digital streams which run across different networks, including many that flow through some of the currently unregulated spaces. So, ladies and gentlemen, content defined broadly as including all the above streams is now a most critical factor. It is where value is generated and added. Content is now the critical determinant of the economic dynamism and prosperity of an economy. We in the Caribbean must take note that the media firms are now competing against technology firms that can operate in unregulated and untaxed spaces while accessing advertising revenue. So I'm sure Minister Clark will be looking into this matter. The traditional media organizations, therefore, are losing their audience and income. Between 2012 and 2014, the audience for radio fell from 21% down to 19.6%. The audience for free-to-air TV fell from 25% to 23.2%. And newspaper readership fell from 22 to 20.6% as people switched to the internet, up from 22% to 25.5%. And international cable moved from 9% to 10.1%. UNCTAD Creative Economy 2015 indicates, for example, the creative economy, of which film and television and the media arts and communications are a part, is an important part now of global trade. The global markets, as I was alluding to, ladies and gentlemen, for traded creative goods and services total 547 billion US dollars in 2012. Growth rates stood at 8.6% annually from 2003 to 2013, showing the strength and resilience of the sector despite the economic deceleration of the world economy. Remember the great crash of 2008. Additionally, creative exports from developing countries, particularly in Asia, are growing faster than in the developed world. And it's a warning for us in the region. We just seem to depend on consumption of other persons' production. Why not be the producers of our content and export to the rest of the world? That is what free trade is about. That's what globalization is about. It gives us greater access to get into the marketplaces of other countries, places that we have never been able to get into before. So we must seize these opportunities. One of the reasons I've been saying to the University of the West Indies and the other universities to become international universities, have campuses, have reached on every continent of the world. Other universities are doing that. Why can't we? We can earn money from these kind of activities, both in terms of information technology, the creative economy broadly defined. Additionally, there are advantages to some of the profound changes in the media landscape that we've just reflected on. One of the most significant gains is that the shift from traditional to non-traditional platform has, as I mentioned earlier, democratized the media and stimulated many new creative and business ideas, as many people are now both consumers and providers of content. News, information, and entertainment are no longer the sole province of the traditional creators and distributors of content. The broadcast and print media, in the area of citizen journalists, free bloggers, tweeters, bloggers, and vloggers, the average person is both consumer and the creator of content. However, the shift to the online world has also brought many new social problems. And as I mentioned, the online world, I like to tell you that CXC, can you imagine, all of us, when we were sitting in CXC, could not dream that there could be an absence of written papers. And CXC is now moving to have, we already started online marking, but full online exam. That students no longer have to go into an exam center. They can stay at home on their tablets or their smartphone and do their exam. So everything has now moving and shifting. Can imagine what the next 20 years, is something I've said to persons, and I'm saying to the media, I have to begin to forecast this epoch by decades and centuries. So what is likely to happen globally in media in the next 10 years, 20, 50 years, 100. And you have to plan for it and how you can be ahead of the curve. And ahead of the curve mean how you are going to be positioned so that you are going to be able to take opportunities of all these great possibilities. And not only your own sustainability, but how you can seize the opportunity to get into other markets and earn far more revenue for your companies and indeed the economy as a whole. Children and young adults are particularly vulnerable to cyberbullying in this new age of technology, online activities, revenge porn, internet addiction disorder, young people and older people, happy people and not so happy people, other forms of deeply problematic internet use. One of the worst problems is that some gangs now record their criminal acts, including murders and rapes, which they then post on social media. And some of them share via platforms such as WhatsApp in order to exalt their success, humiliate their victims, devastate their families, and intimidate others. These posts and shares encourage imitation on one hand and retaliation on the other hand, resulting in a vicious cycle of reciprocal violence. Less obvious but equally troubling problem is that as traditional news outlets have become less profitable, they are also losing some of their primary news gathering and fact-checking capacity. The loss of authoritative and independent sources of news means that many people now obtain their information from closed loops of like-minded people, armchair journalists, we sometimes call them, Claire, which encourages political tribalism, increases vulnerability to fake news and manipulation via social media. Somebody just WhatsApp you an information and you just run it as a news item without checking the authenticity or getting the other side of the story. A number of state agencies, criminal and terrorist organizations, and mercenary hackers now have the ability to destabilize countries by penetrating their communication. It's a matter that I'm investigating, that they're right with the government. That persons can hack into the website and generate a news release that the ministry didn't release. We are all susceptible. And the same thing can happen to your websites as well, penetrating your communication system. It also means that not only the destabilization of our countries in this regard, but the compromising of infrastructure. Seen a big debate in America, the manipulation of elections with fake news. And let us not be naive. The fact that it happened in the United States, it means therefore that persons are going to seek to replicate this in our region, in our countries. So it's something that we have to guard against. The cost of cyber hack, fake news attack has fallen dramatically as the necessary skills have spread throughout the hacker community, which means that these attacks are likely to be much more common in the future. So the critical issues, ladies and gentlemen, for our countries now is that our regulatory framework must focus on protecting vulnerable persons such as children, adolescents, and young adults against malign content. Our states must take steps to improve national media literacy. Media must ensure that it maintains high media quality with particular regard to factual content, support national and citizen security, protect the integrity of all democratic systems. Clayton, 2017. These, ladies and gentlemen, are my thoughts. These are my charges. And I hope that you would have listened to them, internalized them, debate them, add your own perspective, and that out of this AGM and this confab, we'll have a consensus on the way forward in making our, not only our economies, but certainly our media landscape robust and resilient. They become thriving business because the media is very important to the protection of our democracy. It is also important as a part of the engine for social cohesion and ensuring that our economies are resilient and prosperous. So I beg you to think on these things, and I look forward to the outcome of your deliberations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister. a wide-ranging presentation, which I'm not going to attempt to summarize, except to say that we we should take note of the continued public commitment given by the government to freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and to ensuring that our industry can operate free from fear as we seek to hold the authorities accountable for what they do in our countries. Interesting perspectives, Minister, that can go beyond our shores and indeed even beyond the region in many of the things that you have discussed. And there is so much that you said that we would love to dialogue further on and debate on. Issues to do with cultural industries, issues to do with intellectual property protection, issues to do with the tremendous amount of content that broadcasters produce, but its use on multiple platforms is not recognized for its intellectual uh, ownership by the broadcasters. And you know where I am heading with that. I always have to, to raise the issue of whether or not must carry means free carry, and whether our intellectual property rights are to be valued in that space as well. But a lot to think about. And as I said, I'm not going to try to recap the minister's presentation or to summarize it. It was wide ranging. Even aspects of it set off the alarm. No, I'm joking. No, it didn't do that. It didn't do that. Well, thank you very much, Minister, and we trust that you'll be able to remain with us for the remainder of this session, because we are going to hear now from Dr. Ulrich Trutz on the aspect of our deliberations to do with climate change, and to focus us in a little bit more on that. Dr. Trotz is a scientist, so I sat there thinking to myself that many people don't think broadcasters are scientists, but we are scientists too. His training commenced at the university in Edinburgh, and it took him also to a position where he did his doctorate in organic chemistry in Toronto, Canada. His career experiences and achievements are wide and varied. He has worked as Director, Science and Technology Division at the Commonwealth Secretariat from 1993 to 1997, as Secretary of the Commonwealth Science Council and Science Advisor to the Commonwealth Secretariat, to the Commonwealth Secretary General, from 1991 to 1997, Secretary General of the National Science Research Council in Guyana, 1979 to 1991, Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences at the University of Guyana, 1976 to 1979, Director, Institute of Applied Sciences and Technology, also in Guyana from 1980 to 1991. Since 1997, Dr. Trutz has been involved with projects which have been giving direction to the region's efforts at building capacity for climate change. And he is at present the Deputy Director and Science Advisor in the recently established Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, for short 5Cs. So, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together and let's welcome Dr. Ulrich Trutz.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Chair, Honorable Minister, I bring you greetings from our director, Dr. Leslie, from Belize. Greetings for a successful meeting, and an expression of great pleasure that CBU saw it fit to have as its theme for this meeting, building resilience to climate change, business technology, and current options for Caribbean media. Before I start, Chair, in your introduction to the minister, you alluded to his love for cricket. So he'll understand it when I say that I feel like a batsman coming in after Gale has had one of his sizzling innings. Anyway, I will try. Let's start first by letting me walk through the history of climate change in our region. Our work began in 1997. Before that, we had the environmental conference, the Global Environmental Conference in Rio in 1992. And then out of that, small island development states asked for a special environmental meeting, which was held in Barbados in 1994. Out of that meeting, we got the Barbados Program of Action, which identified climate change as one of the biggest threats facing small island developing states. As a result, the CARICOM Secretariat, with help from the University of the West Indies Center for Environment and Development, which was based here at Mona, developed the first regional project to address climate change, the CPAC project, the Caribbean Planning for Adaptation to Climate Change. This was a project that was funded by the Global Environmental Facility, came to us through the World Bank and the OAS. We had a small implementation unit in Barbados. After that project, the CPAC project, which was started in 1997 to 2001, we had a succession project, the ACT project, Adaptation to Climate Change in the Caribbean, funded by the Canadian International Development Agency, CEDA. That was followed by the MAC project, Mainstreaming Adaptation to Climate Change in the Caribbean. The ACT project, the Canadian project, was from 2001 to 2004. The MAC project from 2004 to 2009. And finally, we had the SPAC project, a special project for adaptation to climate change in the Caribbean. Now, these successions of projects, the first three, basically, we were starting to understand what climate change is, what climate change impacts would be in the Caribbean. And the last one, the SPAC, that I mentioned, was where we started to implement measures to mitigate climate change impacts. By this time, we had come to realize that climate change was with us for a long time, and that the region needed a permanent institutional mechanism to effectively address the problems that we foresaw. Heads of their meeting in Canoan in 2002 agreed to establish the 5 Cs, or Climate Change Center, with one condition, that there would be no subventions from governments and that the center had to pay its own way. The fact that I'm standing here to you today addressing you on climate change from the center shows that we've been successful basically in meeting that requirement. The center became functional in 2005 and was sited in the country of Belize. Its mandate to coordinate the region's effort to build a climate resilient and low carbon Caribbean, a rather tall order. Our work over the years was aimed at building the knowledge base to inform Caribbean actions to mitigate the impacts of climate change. We have built capacity in the region to understand what future climate in the region would look like and what new challenges it would pose to the well-being and prosperity of our region. We have started to understand how future climate would impact our agriculture, our water, our key ecosystems, our mangroves, our seagrass beds, our coral reefs and forests, our tourism, our livelihoods, and the very existence of our lifestyles as we know it today. We have also started to craft and implement on a pilot scale actions to lessen the impact climate change will continue to have on these areas, so vital to our survival and our realization of the recently agreed Sustainable Development Goals. Our heads of government have enunciated the Lilienthal Declaration, which is a political statement that highlights the vulnerability of the Caribbean to climate change and calls for regional and international action to address the impacts. They have endorsed a regional framework for achieving development resilient to climate change and its accompanying implementation plan, which informs our work in the region. Both are presently being updated. We have certainly made strides in the regions to start to build climate resilience, but who knows about it? How many Caribbean citizens are aware of the fact that climate change is now one of the most serious challenges to our developmental aspirations? How many are aware that events of the last year with 2 Category 5 hurricanes are a harbinger of things to come? How many understand that each and every one of us has a role to play in building a climate-resilient Caribbean? Recently, we may have heard about the Paris Climate Agreement, a global agreement to keep the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees centigrade, above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees centigrade. The fact that the 1.5 degrees aspiration appears in the Paris Agreement is in no small measure due to advocacy from the Caribbean. We first coined the phrase 1.5 to stay alive, and our youth took it into the Copenhagen conference. And from there, we built that mantra throughout the AOSIS, and that was one of our strong bits of advocacy, and we were very proud that it did appear in the Paris Agreement. And the rationale really is that our region is already fighting with the impacts of a 1 degree warmer world, 1 degree centigrade warmer world. And we felt that we must contain any further increase. Although the agreement aspires to a 1.5 warmer world by the end of this century, our scientists, ably led by Professor Taylor here at the Climate Studies Group in Mona, supported by the INSMET from Cuba, the Institute of Meteorology from Cuba, the Department of Computer Studies at UWI in Cave Hill, the University of Suriname, and the Center, recently carried out a study which showed that on the present pathway in terms of how we consume fossil fuels, we will be 1.5 degree warmer in 2030, long before the end of this century. So we are on a very dangerous pathway. How do we get these messages to the public and mobilize our region for action to cope with the projected impacts of a warmer world? We all have a role to play in building resilience, and we need to get messages out to the different publics. For instance, we need to let all of our people in the region understand the threat that climate change poses to our well-being, and that we are already experiencing impacts of climate change. We need to inform our farmers that there are new ways of approaching agriculture to cope with changing weather patterns and water scarcity, that we now have a reasonable drought forecast system that would inform planting patterns. For instance, our rice farmers in Guyana, they depend on a regular succession of wet and dry seasons. That is no longer the case. But they can get forecasts from the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology to tell them that the rainy season that they are expecting would be delayed, or that the dry season that they are expecting to ripen their rice basically will be wet, so that they can start to manipulate their planting schedules. We need to inform our water managers that there is now available more accurate forecasts that could inform their management of the water resources. We need to get cooperation in maintaining our mangroves and seagrass beds, caring our reefs, our beaches, no sand mining, our forests. The healthier these are, the more they can survive the added impacts of climate change. Respecting the need for protected areas, both marine and terrestrial, and supporting their integrity. And Minister, I ask for your protection as I make this other statement. The other message we need to get out to the public is that they need to stop eating the parrotfish. I put that in a print here in Jamaica some time ago, and the responses and letters to the editor were not too flattering. The reason why is that the parrotfish is important to the health of your reef. It grazes on the algae and the reef and keeps it clean. Much more, the parrotfish is a strange creature. It changes sex. It starts as a male, then as it matures, it changes to the female. Now, if you eat all the males, then you know what will happen to the population. In Belize, it is prohibited to reap the parrotfish, and the result that they have some of the healthiest reef systems in the Caribbean. So we need to get these messages out, and these are just examples. We need to get out to our private sector, particularly the new opportunities to transform the architecture of our energy system, as Jamaica is aggressively pursuing through the use of renewables and energy efficiency. Just let me explain this. The Caribbean has been designated as one of the most energy-intensive regions in the world, which means for each unit of our GDP, the energy input and the cost of energy is high, so that our services or manufacturing, except for Trinidad and Tobago, cannot be competitive. We now have an opportunity under the climate change umbrella to change that, and I'm very pleased to see many of our countries with this Vision 2030, etc., talking about phasing out the use of fossil fuels and moving to renewables. And we need to let people understand why they should avoid living in vulnerable areas, floodplains, landslide susceptible areas, and we need to have our population obey and enforce the dictates for setbacks, for building codes, etc., which a lot of these laws are in our statutes, but they're flaunted. We need to change behavior. And this is why we are here. This is why we're so pleased with this new partnership with CBU. A few months ago, we signed an MOU with the CBU. And let me read from the MOUs. Subject to their mandates, rules, regulations, and procedures, and within the limits of available resources, the parties will collaborate in the following areas: capacity building activities facilitated by 5Cs for CBU members, training and communicating the science of climate change for journalists and journalistic writing for scientists. We both need that. Seeking short-term attachments for journalists to institutions involved in climate science work, sensitizing various stakeholders, including the membership and policymakers, to climate change and its various issues, collaborating in the production and broadcast of information products related to issues surrounding climate change. We need this partnership. The media has been absent from our work. We need to connect with the Caribbean population because in the final analysis, what we're looking at is behavioral change right across the Caribbean. If we are going to build a climate resilient Caribbean, everyone has to be on board, and the media could play a very important role in helping us to spread the message. But the message has to be in language that people understand. And this is why in the MOU, we're talking about training, about changing the scientific language into language that people understand. And in this regard, I came across a statement made almost 3 months ago by Gina McCarthy, the former head of the US Environmental Protection Agency. She made a simple statement when she said, "I love you scientists dearly, but could you speak English?" McCarthy went on to say that in addition to declaring war and confusing jargon, there's a critical need for a wholesale recasting of the climate change argument, which is not reaching the people it needs to persuade. She wants to move the focus away from the health of the planet toward the threat global warming poses to our kids. Earth will be fine. Our main concern should be the ability of our descendants to thrive here. It is a point reiterated on Twitter when someone recently said, slowing down climate change isn't about saving the planet. It's about us and our vulnerability to a level of climate disruption that civilization has never seen. McCarthy is urging environmentalists to double down on science and to avoid the smug, self-righteous poise. Instead of trying to win the argument, win the war, broaden the base, focus on outcomes, cleaner air, lower consumer bills, healthier children. Tell people we have a path to the future that is good, whether or not they believe in climate change. This seems like the central challenge, to make progress that is both significant and sustained. It is a timely statement by McCarthy and not limited to the current conversation on climate change. It's an observation that also reverberates in the discussion on risk reduction or sustainable development. These are two other equally important processes that are woven into the fabric of multi-dimensional debate that includes climate change. So we have a challenge before us. We are looking forward to the partnership with the CBU over the coming months, the coming years, so that we can basically insinuate climate change issues into the everyday life of Caribbean people. Our aim basically is not only to educate, but to inspire action so that as a region, we can attain climate resilience. And Minister, may I take the liberty of, I heard you talking about the new schools. We are encouraging countries basically to look at schools and to make them climate and earthquake resilient. And not only climate and earthquake resilient through building codes, but also fully independent in terms of water supply by having an extensive water harvesting system, their own power with photovoltaics, so that the schools remain functional after an event, and that they can double up as shelters basically whenever there is an event. So this is an opportunity, and the center would be willing to work with you to move in that direction. Yes. Well, actually, the minister did mention money. Let me say that there's a financing mechanism now for the known as the Green Climate Fund. And we have, remember, you might recall earlier in my conversation, I said that our first projects came to us through the World Bank, through the OAS. Now we have battled against that because whenever you do implement projects through these institutions, first of all, they take a big chunk of it as a fee. And then they dictate to you what your project should be like. So we have argued for what is known as direct access. And by direct access, it means some of our regional institutions can go directly to the fund and basically get funds on behalf of the region. I'm proud to say that the center, the Climate Change Center, is now what is known as a regional accredited entity to the Green Climate Fund, which means that we can put in projects to the fund for up to 50 million US per project, grant, pure grant. And so this is one avenue. The other one is the Caribbean Development Bank, which also is a regional implementing entity. Their portfolio, though, is for concessionary loans and grants. The concessionary loans, a moratorium, basically in repayment time, 2%, and a long payback period. So these are new finances available. We've just had our first success with the Water Authority of Barbados, where we have managed to get a 27 million grant from the GCF. And what they're going to do with that is to change a lot of their pumping stations to using photovoltaic energy. And more importantly, to replace a whole set of their pipes to cut down on the leakage and the loss of water. So, as I said, we're there to help countries to identify opportunities for climate financing and to address some of the serious developmental problems that we face. Finally, I want to, it's surprising coming from a scientist, to end with a poem that was written by one of our great Guyanese poets, Martin Carter. These poems were written during, they're called poems of resistance, and they were written in the 60s when Guyana had a lot of strife, political and racial strife. But it's funny how they are relevant to what we are discussing. And the first one is known as, it's called You Are Involved. This I have learned. You know, I see better without the specs. Today a speck, tomorrow a hero. Hero or monster, you are consumed. Like a jig shakes the loom. Like a web is spun the pattern. All are involved, all are consumed. We are all involved in this climate change issue. And if we don't act, we will all be consumed. The other poem is the first stanza of a poem which he wrote called The University of Hunger, which is uncannily prophetic. Here is the first stanza. Twin bars of hunger mark their metal brows. Twin seasons mock them, parching drought and flood. Think about Western Australia, Portugal, California, parching drought. Think about Japan. And recently, bringing it closer to home, Grenada last week, Trinidad and Tobago yesterday, floods. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our poetic presenter, Dr. Trutz. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you are aware that we have gotten double value for money. And I think that our two speakers today, our featured speaker and our keynote speaker, deserve a big round of applause. I would love to have opened the floor for some questions, but as you recognize, we are beyond our time limit here. But with value that we have received, so we are not going to be able to take any questions or comments. I think Dr. Trotz, you'll be with us for some time today. Yes, so we can engage on the parrotfish because we have some new information that we need to work with on that to help the Jamaican public understand. So thank you very much, everyone. We're going to take just a 5-minute break. So please, if you're going to have something, grab it and take it back to your tables because we are going to try to make up our time. Minister is going to leave us at this point, and we thank our Minister, Senator Ruel Reid, for the tremendous presentation and for staying through the rest of the session. I think he got some benefit there, you know. You're going to hear from him, Dr. Trotz. I saw him make the note, and I heard him talk about only able to announce 5 of 18 schools. And then he heard about grant and climate resilient building and $50 million. And I saw him making notes. So you're going to hear from him. So ladies and gentlemen, 5 minutes and we'll be back. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gary. Excellent. Very beneficial.
Yes, I think so too. While you were thinking, I was about that. I was thinking about how I work with my. Thank you very much.